No one lasts 3 nights at Romano's, and the last waitress who asked why was never seen behind that bar again. The warning should have made Grace Bennett turn around, walk back into the freezing Chicago rain, and forget the handwritten "Help Wanted" sign taped crookedly inside the window. But she had exactly $43 in her checking account, rent due Friday, and a landlord who had already stopped accepting apologies. At 31, Grace had learned that desperation could make dangerous doors look like opportunities. She pushed open the heavy black door of Romano's, a dim neighborhood bar tucked beneath an old brick building on the south side, and every conversation inside died at once. Amber light hung over polished mahogany. Men in dark coats occupied the corner booths. A bartender with tattooed knuckles stopped drying a glass. And standing near the back office was a tall man in a charcoal suit who looked at Grace with the calm attention of someone accustomed to knowing exactly who entered his world. Grace tightened her fingers around her purse strap. She was a full-figured woman with soft curves she had spent too many years being taught to apologize for, especially by people who mistook cruelty for honesty. 3 weeks earlier, a restaurant manager had looked her up and down during an interview and told her the dining room needed someone with a more polished image. Grace had smiled until she reached the parking lot. Then she had cried inside her 12-year-old Honda before driving home. Tonight, she refused to cry. "I'm here about the waitress job," she said. A man at the bar laughed. "Sweetheart, you sure you got the right place?" Another glanced at her inexpensive coat and worn shoes. Maybe nobody warned her. Grace felt the familiar heat climb her neck, but she kept her chin level. "I can carry 6 plates, remember 20 orders without writing them down, and handle a double shift without complaining. If that's not enough, tell me now." The laughter disappeared. The man in the charcoal suit stepped forward. He was Dominic Romano, 38, owner of the bar, and, though Grace did not yet know it, the feared Mafia Boss whose name made hardened men lower their voices across Chicago. Dominic had money, influence, and enemies in places Grace could not imagine. He also had the emotional warmth of a locked safe. 5 years earlier, betrayal from someone he trusted had left him suspicious of loyalty and almost allergic to kindness. His dark eyes moved over Grace, but not the way other men's had. He noticed the rainwater dripping from her sleeve, the blister on her heel, the way she was frightened yet refused to retreat. "Who told you we were hiring?" he asked. "The sign." "And nobody told you what kind of bar this is." Grace glanced around. "A bar that apparently needs a waitress." For the first time that night, something almost resembling amusement touched Dominic's face. Then a glass shattered. One of the customers had deliberately knocked it from the counter beside Grace. "Start with that," he said, smirking. Grace stared at the broken glass, then at him. "Did you drop it accidentally?" "Does it matter?" "It does if you expect me to clean up after a grown man trying to embarrass me." Someone quietly muttered, "Oh, hell." Dominic's expression changed. Grace crouched anyway, not because the man had ordered her to, but because a jagged piece had skidded toward an elderly cleaner carrying a bucket. Grace caught the woman gently by the arm. "Careful, ma'am." She moved the shard away with her shoe, found a broom behind the counter, and cleaned the floor without another word. Dominic watched everything. She had defended her dignity, then protected someone else's safety without needing praise. That combination was rare in his world. "You're hired," he said. Grace straightened. "You haven't even interviewed me." "I just did." The smirking customer leaned back. "Dominic, come on. She doesn't exactly look like the girls you usually put out front." The room went dangerously still. Grace knew that tone. She had heard versions of it in school hallways, job interviews, first dates, and family gatherings. Her shoulders instinctively pulled inward. Dominic saw it. He crossed the distance between them, stopping beside Grace, not touching her, simply making it unmistakably clear where he stood. Then he looked at the customer. Her name is Grace Bennett. You'll use it. The man's smile vanished. Dominic turned to Grace and lowered his voice. $8 an hour above what the sign says. Tips are yours. Nobody touches you. Nobody insults you. If anyone does, you tell me. Grace stared at him, suspicious rather than grateful. Why? Dominic's gaze held hers, because people show you who they are when they think someone has no power. Before Grace could answer, the back door slammed open. A breathless security guard rushed inside and whispered something into Dominic's ear. Dominic's face hardened instantly. Grace caught only 4 words. Someone found the basement door. Then Dominic looked at the brand-new waitress everyone had laughed at 5 minutes earlier, and for the first time, Grace saw something beneath his control that frightened her more than anger. Concern. Grace, he said quietly, whatever happens tonight, do not leave this room alone. She had taken the only job nobody else wanted. She had no idea that before her first shift ended, she would discover why. Mr. Romano, there's blood on the basement stairs. The security guard's words turned the bar silent enough for Grace Bennett to hear the rain tapping against the windows. Dominic Romano didn't flinch. Whatever concern she had seen in his eyes vanished behind the cold expression that had made dangerous men fear him for years. Lock the front door, he ordered. Nobody leaves. 2 men immediately moved, and Grace's stomach tightened. She had needed a paycheck, not a crime scene. I think I've changed my mind about the job, she said, reaching for her purse. Dominic stepped into her path, but left several feet between them. You can quit tomorrow. That's generous. Tonight, walking outside could be worse than staying. Grace searched his face. Who exactly are you? Before Dominic could answer, the customer who had mocked her earlier stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. I'm leaving. Dominic barely looked at him. Sit down, Victor. The man froze. Grace noticed it instantly. 10 minutes ago, Victor had been laughing at her. Now his face had gone pale because Dominic Romano had spoken 4 quiet words. He sat. Grace finally understood that the expensive suit, armed security, and frightened customers weren't decorations. Dominic wasn't simply the owner of Romano's. He was the reason everyone behaved differently inside it. You're Mafia, she whispered. Dominic's eyes settled on hers. Does that change your answer about needing the job? It changes several things. A faint sound came from behind the bar before she could finish. A metallic click beneath the music system. Grace turned. During years of restaurant work, she had learned every ordinary noise a bar could make. Ice machines humming, refrigeration compressors kicking on, bottles settling against shelves. This wasn't one of them. Wait. One of Dominic's men was reaching beneath the counter. Grace grabbed his sleeve. Don't touch that. Every eye turned toward her. Move away, she said. Dominic approached slowly. Beneath a loose wooden panel, barely visible beside a bundle of wires, was a small unfamiliar device with a blinking green light. Dominic's expression hardened. He motioned everyone back and called his security chief. Minutes later, the device was safely removed and identified as a hidden transmitter, apparently planted to capture private conversations. Dominic looked toward the basement, then at the people inside his bar. Someone had gotten close enough to spy on him. Worse, it had happened from inside his own establishment. Victor began protesting immediately. You can't seriously think one of us. I haven't said what I think, Dominic replied. That silenced him again. Grace suddenly noticed the elderly cleaner from earlier trembling beside the kitchen doorway. While Dominic's men questioned customers, Grace crossed to her and brought her a chair and a glass of water. Slow breaths, she said softly. You're okay. Dominic watched from across the room. Grace had just discovered she was standing inside a Mafia Boss's bar during a security breach, yet she was comforting someone more frightened than herself. That bothered him in a way he couldn't explain. Kindness in his world usually arrived with an invoice attached. Grace's didn't. 20 minutes later, Dominic's security team confirmed there was no injured person in the basement. The blood on the stairs had been animal blood deliberately placed there as a distraction. The real target had been the transmitter. Someone wanted Dominic's attention downstairs while something happened upstairs. "So I accidentally helped you," Grace said when Dominic explained it. "You noticed what trained men missed. Waitressing teaches you to notice things." "Apparently my security team should start carrying trays." Grace almost smiled, then caught herself. Dominic did smile barely, and every man nearby looked as if they had witnessed an eclipse. He led her toward a quieter booth, but stopped when she stiffened. "I'm not going anywhere private with you." Instead of being offended, Dominic pulled out a chair in the open bar. "Then we talk here." That surprised her. Powerful men in Grace's experience often treated boundaries as challenges. Dominic treated hers as instructions. "Why did you really take this job?" he asked. Grace hesitated. "Because my old restaurant decided I didn't fit their image. Because rent doesn't care about humiliation. Because I'm tired of being told I should be grateful for whatever scraps people offer me." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Name the restaurant." "No." "Why?" "Because I don't need revenge. I need work." Something shifted behind his eyes. She wasn't asking him to rescue her. She was asking for the chance to stand on her own. Dominic reached into his jacket, removed a thick envelope, and placed it on the table. Grace didn't touch it. "What's that?" "An advance." "I haven't worked an hour." "Then earn it." She pushed the envelope back. "Pay me after my shift." Dominic stared at her for several seconds, then quietly returned it to his pocket. 6 o'clock tomorrow. If I come back." "You'll come back." Grace raised an eyebrow. That confidence must be exhausting. This time Dominic's smile was unmistakable. Then Grace saw something through the rain-streaked front window. A dark SUV had been parked across the street since she arrived. Its headlights flashed once, then twice. Dominic followed her gaze and the warmth disappeared from his face. "Get away from the window." "Why?" The SUV slowly pulled into traffic. Dominic's security chief hurried over, holding a photograph found beside the hidden transmitter. Dominic took one look and went completely still. Grace saw it before he could turn it over. It was a photograph of her entering Romano's less than an hour earlier, taken from across the street. Written beneath it were 6 words. "Your new waitress won't last either." Grace's hands went cold. "They know my name?" Dominic stepped beside her, close enough to protect her but careful not to touch her. His voice dropped into something colder than anger. "Not yet." He looked toward the disappearing SUV, "and now nobody is going to find out." Grace had thought taking the job was the dangerous decision. She was beginning to realize the danger had noticed her first. Grace Bennett barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the photograph of herself entering Romano's and those 6 words beneath it. "Your new waitress won't last either." By 5:30 the next evening, common sense told her to stay home. But at exactly 6, she pushed through Romano's black door, wearing a clean white blouse, black pants, and the same inexpensive shoes Dominic had noticed the night before. Dominic Romano was already waiting. He stood beneath the amber lights in a black suit, speaking quietly to 2 security men, but his eyes found Grace the instant she entered. "You came back." Grace removed her coat. "I have rent due Friday." "That's your reason." "That's the reason you're getting." Dominic almost smiled, but his attention dropped to the dark circles beneath her eyes. Without commenting, he moved a chair away from the service station so she would have more room behind the bar. It was such a small gesture that Grace wondered if she had imagined it. Then the front door opened, and a woman in a cream designer coat entered with 3 men behind her. Dominic's expression turned to stone. "Elena Moretti," he said. Elena was elegant, wealthy, and connected to one of Chicago's most influential crime families. Her father had spent months pushing for an alliance with Dominic, and Elena behaved as though the agreement already included a wedding ring. She kissed Dominic's cheek without permission. He stepped away. Then she noticed Grace. "So this is her?" Grace stopped polishing a glass. Dominic's gaze sharpened. "What does that mean?" Elena smiled. "People talk. Apparently you shut down your own bar last night over a waitress." She looked Grace over slowly, allowing the insult to live in her expression before speaking. "I expected someone more remarkable." Grace felt the old instinct to make herself smaller, but she forced her shoulders back. "Can I get you something to drink?" Elena laughed softly. Confidence. How charming. Dominic stepped closer to the bar. "Her name is Grace." Elena's smile faded. "I didn't ask. I wasn't answering a question." The room became quiet. Grace looked at Dominic, unsettled by how easily he had chosen public disrespect from an ally over allowing someone to diminish her. Elena leaned toward him. "You're risking a valuable relationship for an employee you met yesterday." Dominic's voice remained calm. If basic respect threatens the relationship, it wasn't valuable. Elena left without ordering anything, but the hatred in the look she gave Grace lingered long after the door closed. 2 hours later, the dinner rush filled Romano's. Grace moved between tables with surprising speed, balancing plates along one arm, remembering orders, teasing an elderly regular about his obsession with extra pickles. For the first time in weeks, she felt useful instead of judged. Dominic watched from his usual corner, pretending to study paperwork while noticing every time she smiled. Then a customer at table 7 suddenly shouted, "My watch!" Conversation stopped. A businessman stood, checking his coat pockets. It was right here, $20,000. Victor, the same man who had mocked Grace the previous night, immediately pointed toward her. "She cleared your table." Grace froze. "I never touched your coat." Victor stood. "Then empty your apron." Humiliation hit harder because she recognized the pattern. Accuse the person with the least power and wait for everyone else to believe it. Grace slowly removed her apron. "I didn't steal anything." "Then prove it," Victor said. Dominic appeared beside her before anyone noticed him crossing the room. Nobody searches her. "Dominic, the watch is missing, and accusing her without evidence won't make it appear." Grace swallowed. "Search my apron." Dominic looked at her. "You don't have to." "I know." She handed it to his security chief herself. "But I'm not leaving this room with people wondering." The pockets contained a pen, $12 in tips, 2 peppermint candies, and nothing else. Victor's face tightened. Then another waiter opened Grace's locker. A silver watch fell onto the floor. Gasps spread across the bar. Grace stared at it. "That isn't mine." Victor smiled. "Of course it isn't. It belongs to the man you stole it from." Dominic didn't look at the watch. He looked at Grace. Her face had gone pale, but she wasn't begging him to believe her. "If you think I did it," she said quietly, "fire me, but don't make me apologize for something I didn't do." Something cold moved through Dominic's expression. "You're not fired." Victor scoffed. "The evidence is right there." Dominic turned toward him. "Exactly." He picked up the watch with a handkerchief and examined its clasp. Then he looked toward the ceiling. Security footage. Now. Victor's confidence vanished. That was the first thing Grace noticed. The second was the kitchen door swinging shut behind someone who had been watching them. Dominic noticed that too. 10 minutes later, they stood before the security monitors. The hallway camera showed Grace's locker clearly. At 7:42 p.m., while Grace was serving table 12, a hooded figure entered the employee corridor and slipped something through the locker's ventilation slot. Dominic paused the footage. "Zoom in." His security chief enlarged the image. A distinctive gold ring flashed on the stranger's hand. Dominic went silent. He recognized it. Every senior member of the Moretti organization wore one exactly like it. Grace stared at him. "Elena? Maybe someone wants me to think it's Elena." Before he could say more, every monitor suddenly went black. The lights inside Romano's flickered once, twice. Then darkness swallowed the bar. Grace heard chairs scrape and someone scream. A hand suddenly closed around her wrist. She twisted away, but another arm reached from behind. "Dominic!" she shouted. A second later, emergency lights flooded the room red. Dominic turned toward her voice just in time to see the kitchen door slam shut. Grace was gone. On the floor where she had been standing lay one of her peppermint candies, and beside it, a gold Moretti ring. "Grace!" Dominic Romano's voice cut through the red emergency light, but the kitchen door had already slammed shut. He crossed the bar in seconds, his security team behind him, and found the rear hallway empty except for Grace Bennett's serving tray spinning slowly on the tile. The emergency exit stood open to the freezing Chicago night. Dominic stopped at the threshold. Tire marks streaked across the wet alley. Whoever had taken her had planned the blackout, the planted watch, and the escape route before Grace ever arrived for her second shift. "Find that vehicle," Dominic ordered. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "Traffic cameras, private cameras, every intersection within 5 miles. His security chief hesitated. "And Moretti?" Dominic opened his palm and stared at the gold ring found beside Grace's peppermint candy. "Nobody touches Elena until I know whether this is evidence or bait." Across the city, Grace woke inside the back room of an abandoned restaurant with her wrists loosely bound to a chair. She tested the knot without panicking. Years of being underestimated had taught her something useful. People talked freely around women they considered powerless. 2 men stood beyond a cracked doorway. "Moretti wants Romano angry," one whispered. "Once he breaks the alliance, both families go to war." The other man cursed. "Elena doesn't know anything about this." Grace went still. So the ring was planted too. Then she heard a name that changed everything. Victor said Romano would blame her immediately. Victor, the customer who had humiliated her, the man who had accused her of stealing the watch. Grace lowered her eyes before one of the kidnappers entered. "You're causing a lot of trouble for a waitress." "Funny," Grace said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "I was about to say the same thing about your career choices." He laughed and placed her purse on a table. That was his mistake. Grace saw her phone half hidden beneath it. He hadn't noticed that her old cracked phone was still connected to the wireless earbuds buried in her coat pocket. When he turned away, she slipped one earbud free and pressed its control, activating the phone's voice assistant. "Call Dominic," she whispered. At Romano's, Dominic's phone rang. Grace's name appeared. He answered instantly. "Grace?" No response, only muffled voices. Then he heard her deliberately raise her own. "This abandoned restaurant smells like Lake Michigan and old garlic. You could at least have kidnapped me somewhere with decent heating." Dominic understood. She was giving him clues. His security chief traced the call while Dominic listened, jaw tight. "She's helping us find her," he said. Minutes later, they narrowed the signal to an abandoned Italian restaurant less than a mile from the lake. Dominic was already moving when another voice came through the phone. Victor's. Romano should have learned after the first waitress. Dominic stopped. The first waitress. Suddenly the warning Grace had heard before entering Romano's made sense. Months earlier, another employee had vanished after discovering someone was leaking information from the bar. Dominic had believed she had simply fled Chicago. Now he realized Victor had manufactured the rumor that made employees afraid to work there. The empty waitress position hadn't been cursed. It had been kept empty so Victor could continue using the service corridor to plant surveillance devices. Grace had accidentally stepped into the middle of a betrayal that had been operating inside Dominic's circle for months. "We have him," Dominic said. 20 minutes later, headlights swept across the abandoned restaurant windows. Inside, Victor grabbed Grace by the arm and pulled her upright. "You were supposed to quit after the photograph." Grace's fear was real, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her collapse. "Then you should have picked someone easier to scare," Victor's face hardened. Outside, Dominic approached through the rain with his security team. He could have sent men ahead. He didn't. Grace heard shouting near the front entrance, followed by hurried footsteps. Victor dragged her toward the kitchen, but Grace noticed a metal serving cart beside them. She drove her heel against its wheel lock and shoved with all her strength. The cart crashed into Victor's legs. His grip loosened. Grace pulled free and ran. She reached the dining room just as Dominic entered. For one suspended second, neither moved. Grace's hair was disheveled, her wrists red from the rope, her face pale, but she was standing. Dominic crossed the room and stopped directly in front of her. "Are you hurt?" "Mostly furious." Relief flashed across his face. He removed his coat and placed it around her shoulders, his hands careful, never assuming permission. "Good," he murmured. "Stay furious." Grace's composure finally cracked. "I thought nobody would come." Dominic lowered himself slightly so his eyes were level with hers. "I came." Behind them, security restrained Victor without further violence. Grace gripped Dominic's coat around herself. "He said Elena didn't order this. He wanted you to blame the Morettis." Dominic nodded. "You just prevented a war." "Not bad for someone who supposedly doesn't fit the image." Dominic's expression softened. "Grace, look at me." She did. "There is nothing about you that needs to become smaller to belong in a room." Her eyes filled before she could stop them. Then Dominic's security chief approached, holding a dusty employee file they had found in Victor's office. "Boss, you need to see this." Inside was a photograph of the waitress who had disappeared months earlier. Grace looked at it, and the color drained from her face. "I know her." Dominic turned sharply. Grace touched the photograph with trembling fingers. "Her name is Rachel Bennett." She looked up at him. "She's my sister." And suddenly, Grace's decision to walk into Romano's no longer looked like coincidence at all. "My sister didn't disappear because she was afraid of this place," Grace Bennett said, staring at Rachel's photograph. "She disappeared because she found something." Dominic Romano's expression hardened. They were still inside the abandoned restaurant, rain beating against the boarded windows while his security team searched Victor's hidden office. Grace remained wrapped in Dominic's coat, but the shock had pushed exhaustion from her face. Rachel had stopped contacting Grace 8 months earlier after sending one final message saying she needed to fix a mistake. Grace had assumed her older sister wanted distance after years of family arguments. Now that silence felt terrifyingly different. Dominic turned toward Victor, who sat guarded across the room. "Where is Rachel?" Victor smiled. "You think I'm going to tell you?" Grace stepped forward before Dominic could. "No, you're going to tell me because you've spent months assuming women like my sister and me are too insignificant to notice anything." Victor's smile weakened. Grace placed Rachel's employee file on the table. "You planted the transmitter. You planted the watch. You used Moretti rings because you wanted Dominic to destroy his alliance. Rachel discovered it first, didn't she?" Victor said nothing, but his eyes flicked toward a filing cabinet. Grace caught it. So did Dominic. Inside the cabinet, his security chief found receipts, coded payments, and a storage unit key taped beneath a drawer. One receipt was dated only 3 days earlier. Grace grabbed Dominic's arm. If Rachel were dead, why would Victor still be paying for a storage unit connected to her? Victor's face changed. Dominic leaned toward him. "Because she's alive." For the first time, Victor looked afraid. Within minutes, Dominic's team traced the unit to an industrial storage facility 12 miles away. But another discovery made the room colder. Victor had scheduled the stolen information from Romano's to be transmitted to a rival organization at midnight. It was already 11:17. If the files went out, Dominic's businesses, employees, and allies could all become targets. "We have 43 minutes, his security chief said. "Then go stop the transfer," Dominic ordered. "Boss, we need you there." Your authorization codes can shut everything down faster." Dominic looked at Grace. Everyone understood the choice: protect the empire he had spent years building, or personally help find a woman he had never met because Grace needed him. Grace understood too. "Go," she said. "Your people depend on you." Dominic shook his head. "So do you." "I'm not asking you to sacrifice everything for me." "You aren't." He stepped closer. "I'm choosing what matters." Grace's throat tightened, but she refused to let fear decide for her. "Then we split the problem. Your team stops the transfer. You and I find Rachel." Dominic studied her. "You were kidnapped less than an hour ago. And I'm still standing." Something almost proud moved through his eyes. "Stay beside me." At 11:31, Dominic's SUV stopped outside the storage facility. Cold fluorescent lights buzzed over endless rows of metal doors. Grace spotted Unit 214 before the guards did. Its lock had been replaced recently. Dominic positioned himself in front of her as security opened it. Inside sat boxes, a folding chair, bottled water, and a frightened woman who recoiled from the light. "Rachel?" Grace whispered. The woman looked up. "Grace?" Grace ran to her. The sisters collided in an embrace, both crying, while Dominic quietly turned away and gave them privacy. Rachel was weak but unharmed. Victor had hidden her after she discovered his operation, keeping her isolated because she had copied evidence he desperately needed. "The evidence," Rachel said suddenly. "He never found it." She looked at Grace. "Remember Mom's old recipe book?" Grace froze. "The one you mailed me." Rachel nodded. "There's a flash drive inside the spine." Grace realized the book was sitting in her apartment. It contained everything needed to expose Victor and clear the Morettis. Dominic's phone rang. His security chief sounded urgent. "Boss, we stopped most of the transfer, but Victor had a second system. We need proof identifying his outside contacts before midnight." 11:46. 14 minutes. Grace wiped her tears. "My apartment is 8 minutes away." Dominic immediately moved. At 11:55, they rushed through Grace's front door. She pulled the battered cookbook from a kitchen shelf and tore open its spine. A tiny flash drive dropped into her palm. Dominic's laptop opened on the table. Files appeared: payments, recordings, names, dates, and video showing Victor planting surveillance equipment inside Romano's. Then another file opened automatically. Grace stared at the screen. Victor wasn't merely selling information. He had been working with Dominic's own second-in-command, Marcus Vale, for almost a year. Dominic went completely still. Marcus was the man he had trusted since his brother's death, the man currently leading the team supposedly stopping the transfer. Dominic checked the time. 11:58. His phone rang again. Marcus's name appeared. Dominic answered. "We found the backup server," Marcus said smoothly. "Give me your authorization code and I'll shut it down." Grace looked at Dominic and shook her head. Dominic finally understood the trap. Marcus didn't need the code to stop the leak. He needed it to take control of everything. Dominic placed the phone on speaker. "Marcus," he said quietly, "you made one mistake." Silence. "What mistake?" Dominic looked at Grace, the waitress everyone had underestimated from the moment she entered his bar. "You gave me a reason to trust someone smarter than you." Grace inserted Rachel's flash drive. The screen displayed one final option: expose network. Midnight was 60 seconds away, and somewhere across Chicago, Marcus realized the woman he had dismissed as powerless was about to destroy his entire plan. "Do it," Dominic Romano said. Grace Bennett pressed expose network with 11 seconds left before midnight. For one terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then the screen filled with confirmation messages as Rachel's evidence was copied to Dominic's trusted legal team and the people responsible for protecting his legitimate businesses. Payment records, surveillance footage, account numbers, and Victor's communications appeared one after another. Most importantly, there were recordings proving Marcus Vale had engineered the entire betrayal. Dominic's phone went silent. Then it rang again. Marcus. Dominic answered on speaker. "You think a waitress saved you?" Marcus demanded. Dominic looked at Grace across her tiny kitchen, at the curvy woman who had walked into his bar because she needed rent money and somehow uncovered what his most trusted men had missed. "No," Dominic said calmly. "I know she did." Marcus began threatening him, but Dominic ended the call. He refused to give the man another second of power. By sunrise, Victor's network had collapsed. Marcus had been exposed to Dominic's organization, and the evidence had been turned over through channels that ensured neither man could quietly return to Romano's world. Elena Moretti was cleared of involvement, preventing the conflict Victor had tried to create. Rachel was taken somewhere safe to recover, and for the first time in 8 months, Grace knew where her sister was sleeping. But when dawn finally softened the Chicago skyline, Grace sat alone at a table inside the closed bar, staring at her waitress apron. Dominic found her there. "You should be resting. So should you. I'm not good at it. Neither am I." He sat across from her rather than beside her. No guards, no orders, no Mafia Boss demanding obedience. Just Dominic. Grace ran her thumb along the edge of the apron. "I don't know if I can come back." He was silent for a moment. "Then don't." She looked up, surprised. "That easy?" "Grace, I offered you a job. I didn't buy your choices." Something inside her loosened. She had spent so much of her life around people who disguised control as concern that she almost didn't recognize respect when it was sitting directly across from her. Dominic placed an envelope on the table. Grace immediately narrowed her eyes. "If that's another advance. Your wages, your tips, and compensation for the shifts you lost because my bar became dangerous." Grace opened it, counted quickly, and pushed half back. "This is too much." Dominic almost smiled. "Of course you counted it." "Of course I counted it." He removed the extra money without arguing. That mattered more than the money itself. "What happens to Romano's?" she asked. "It changes. Because of Marcus? Because he proved fear isn't the same as loyalty." Dominic looked around the empty room. "I built a place where everyone obeyed me. You walked in and reminded me that obedience doesn't tell you who someone is." Grace's eyes softened. "That sounds suspiciously like personal growth. Don't spread it around." She laughed, and Dominic realized he had never heard her laugh without fear somewhere behind it. 3 weeks later, Romano's reopened. The hidden surveillance equipment was gone. Security had been rebuilt. Rachel was recovering nearby and had begun repairing her relationship with Grace. And Grace returned. Not because Dominic demanded it, and not because she needed rescuing, but because this time she was offered something she had rarely received, a choice. She became floor manager, earning the position by reorganizing service, training new staff, and proving she could command a crowded room without raising her voice. On opening night, Grace wore a deep green dress beneath her manager's jacket. Her body had not changed. She no longer pulled fabric across her stomach when strangers looked at her. She no longer lowered her eyes before entering a room. When an old customer muttered that Dominic had become soft, Dominic calmly crossed the floor and stopped beside Grace. "No," Grace said before he could speak. "He learned better hiring standards." Dominic looked at her, then laughed. Later, after the last customer left, warm amber light spilled across the empty bar. Dominic approached her slowly. "Dinner tomorrow?" Grace raised an eyebrow. "Is that an order, Mr. Romano?" "No." For perhaps the first time in his life, the powerful Mafia Boss looked almost uncertain. "It's me asking." Grace let him wait just long enough to enjoy it. "Then yes." Dominic offered his hand. She took it because she wanted to. Months later, people still whispered about the feared man who had changed after a curvy waitress entered the job nobody wanted. But Grace knew the truth was better. Dominic hadn't given her a new life. He had given her room to reclaim her own, and she had shown him that strength without trust was just another kind of loneliness. She never needed to become smaller to be chosen, and he never needed to become weaker to become gentle. Sometimes the door everyone else fears is the one that leads you home. So what would you have done if you were Grace? Walked away from Romano's that first night, or taken the job nobody wanted? If her story kept you watching, subscribe to the channel for more stories about danger, courage, unexpected love, and the people the world should never have underestimated.